Hi, this is Leora Alderson with Gardens All and Coleman Alderson with Gardens All, and we're here today with Rodger Lendhardt of Norm's Farms. Norm was his dad, and we're really excited about this interview because Rodger and his family have an elderberry farm, and Rodger's going to start by sharing some of the history of how he and his family got into that. And welcome, Rodger.
Well, thanks for having me. I really am delighted to be able to share our story with the listeners today. The thing came up here just a second ago. You know, people want to call me Norm all the time. They even call my wife Norm. So we're called Norm's Farms because it was my dad who was the guy who worked so hard for so long so that, you know, this generation of his family would have a bought and paid for farm. The problem comes for most small family farms in rural America, and that unless you got a big chunk of land, it's just darn hard to make a living farming. Most farmers file a Schedule F, and we find that 80% of the Schedule F farm income filers also file another form of income. So we're faced with that same dilemma. We were a commodity farm, and several years ago, my dad asked me to come take over the farming operations there. I just didn't see any real future in growing commodities, and especially animal feed. And I knew for certain I didn't want to have anything to do with any GMO crops, which was the tendency in the commodity world. Everything sort of headed that way. And then through annual tillage, we felt like in our location for our farm, which is in the Missouri bottoms outside of Columbia near Jeff City, that we were losing a lot of soil every time the creek would come out of its bank. So we wanted to get away from annual tillage and really get into permanent and perennial agriculture and to create a system by which we could build soil from the bottom up and the top down, one that included not only organic gardening methods, but biological farm methods where we really concentrate on the soil and creating a good, healthy environment for those microorganisms that are the building block of soil. We wanted to be able to build soil from the bottom up and the top down at the same time. You know, we don't want to wait 1,000 years to build an inch of soil. You know, we want to do that overnight. And we can literally do that now in flood situations when we used to lose soil because it's full of permanent and perennial agricultural plants. We actually trap silt. You know, we catch debris. You know, anything that floats is now stopped by the elderberries. That falls to the ground. The cover crops we use have nitrogen-fixing legumes like clover and vetch and birdfoot trefoil, perennial grasses like little blue stem, bluegrass, perennial ryegrasses like Manhattan and penfine. And we do this all while allowing all the native perennial weeds to flourish. So this may not sound like much, but in the grand scheme of things, we need the pollinators, you know? And whoever they are and whatever it is, they're pollinating. When we have a field that's sterile with a Roundup ready crop of corn or soybeans, the only thing alive in that field is the corn or the soybeans. There's no weeds there. There's no milkweed for the monarchs to eat. There's nothing left except the soybeans.
Yeah.
I had a question for you, Rodger. You all really did a turnaround from the customary, the commodity-based farming and using all the chemicals and everything, and traditional tillage cycles. Where did you all go? How did you learn how to do this so differently?
You know, this has been a concern of mine for a long time. My father, again, you know, I keep bringing him up because without him, you know, we wouldn't be able to sit here and even have this conversation with you guys today. Yeah. He was a real strong proponent of wildlife conservation and farmland preservation. So you have to understand a little bit about the history of the farm. When he bought the farm in 1968, it had over 100 head of cattle running on it. We're in really highly erodible, wind-blown, loess soil there in the river bottoms. We have uplifts of limestone cliffs that act as giant snow fences, and over the millennia, they would catch the silt and the dust blowing off the plains of the Great West. And so the soil is highly erodible. When you put cattle on it, you get great big giant ravines big enough to hide houses in.
Wow.
I mean, you know, when we first bought this land, it was so abused and used and worn out that we had to really work hard to get the cattle scars healed. We had to work hard to repair some of those riparian areas that are prone to flooding, and get them set up so we weren't having, all this water washing out across the hills and cutting across the fields. So we've installed terraces with drains in them to direct the water to keep our fields dry. So we've done a huge amount of engineering with our land to try to figure out how, over all the years, to make a living with it. We even had land that we put in the PIC program, payment in kind, where the government actually pays you to take land out of production and keep it fallow and basically let it grow up, and whatever it wants to grow up. They like you to mow it and keep the trees out periodically. But, so we've tried those kind of things. We hold events on their property. The Elderberry Festival was a way to bring attention about the elderberry. And now we have an event called the Elderberry Jam that is a spin-off of the Elderberry Festival. We have other events that we hold on the farm. And some people like to grow corn. We say we like to grow smiles. So that's one way that we can supplement our income. We do have a little bit of the land that we do lease out to another organic farmer who is raising some of the commodities, but he's doing it all organically through tillage and mineralization of the soils. So we're really looking at that kind of stuff with the thing. So I learned a lot through my father, to answer your question, Coleman, but I've also done a lot of reading about permaculture from the likes of Bill Mollison, an Australian who has written extensively and actually coined the term permaculture, was the first one to use that in literature and publications. So he's a great resource. There's a whole PDF available of his entire writings that I recommend people read. That's a good one. Mark Shepard is the proponent of restoration agriculture, and he's written a great book that talks about the importance of permanent and perennial agriculture and how we can literally restore the garden, through perennial agriculture, and how that can restore local economies through processing nuts and value-added food products, and the whole distribution, cold storage, transport. Everything can become much localized based on what grows where. In the Midwest, we have the oak savanna. Here out in the Appalachian chain, we have our boreal forest. In the desert, we have a different type of biome out there, where different things like pine nuts as a permaculture can be incorporated into the native landscape. So these are things that we try to do. Elderberry being at the very heart of that for us. It was a quick way to get something going in our, in our rows. We have our alleys there to help capture soil. And it was a quick way to get a crop that would have a value-added opportunity for, again, literally a way to save the family farm. One of the things that we did was we put our farm into a trust. So that's really important too for other farmers out there who don't have anybody to carry on, think about how they can preserve their land that way.
Okay, so could you maybe elaborate on that a little bit, Rodger? And also for the listeners, many of them may not yet know that you're not actually living on the family farm in Missouri, but that you're in North Carolina. So maybe you could just do a little bit of the migration. We'll come back to the elderberry, maybe even in part 2, but if you could do a little bit of the setting up. Okay, so you transformed the farm in Missouri. You chose elderberry for various reasons, like erosion control, fast growing. And so a little bit about how you decided, and we'll come back to that, but let's touch now, since you mentioned the trust, on how it is that you guys set up a family trust and how that connects with what you're doing in North Carolina, if at all.
Well, excellent. That's a great part of our story, and I know it's a bit difficult for a lot of readers to understand. We have lived here now in North Carolina for over 25 years. I grew up in central Missouri. My father purchased the land in 1968 when I was 11. So he wanted me to take over that farm. Well, I wasn't ready to just quit everything and move back there. I got a life. And so we started growing the elderberries again, have to because that is a part of the big story. So we were going to grow those to sell them to a winery, and I was going to do so with a farming partner. The winery deal fell apart. We didn't make the connection there, so we started producing a value-added food product with a Midwestern label.
And that is, and a value-added food product would be like jams or the extract. Is that right?
Yeah, what we started doing was we started juicing the elderberry. We knew somebody that had a product line. They were making a shiitake mushroom sauce and a blueberry syrup. And they basically said, when they found out we couldn't sell our berries to this winery for any kind of price, he said, well, let's just make that into juice for you guys. And we did. And we turned a few 100 pounds of juice into a couple $1,000s worth of elderberry juice. We didn't really know what we had at the time. We didn't understand the value of elderberry as a supplement. And how much Americans have been paying for the European counterpart. Most of what America consumes is European in nature, either a direct product or in origin. So now this whole thing that we're trying to do back in the Midwest with the family farm, to save it, to produce a crop that's got value, the best value there was to preserve that crop in the form of a product with shelf stability. So in the ensuing years after that, the partnership just didn't work out for various reasons. And so I started my own product line out here with our own manufacturing facility here in North Carolina. They're based out of Elizabethtown, North Carolina. And so what we do is we transport our fruit to North Carolina where it's kept in cold storage. And then we do small batch processing where we literally will pull a pallet full of frozen berries out of storage, and then we'll run our product. And we run product every 6 to 8 weeks. The reason that's important for everybody to understand is because products all have what we call a shelf life, a use by date. Yeah. And so by doing small batches, we can literally ensure when those orders go out to the store that 95 to 98% of the shelf life is still there. If we manufacture everything that we harvest all at once, 11 months later, stuff has been in the warehouse and 50% of the shelf life is gone by the time we get it to the store. So it's very important to be able to do this in a way that ensures good shelf stability, the best product for the consumer.
Yeah.
So that's why we're in North Carolina, but we still do rely very heavily on, berries not only that we grow ourselves, but other berries from other small farmers. We have a saying here at Norm's Farms, and we believe in wealth for the farmer and health for the community.
Wealth for the farmer and health for the community. We talked about that when we first spoke. I love this conversation on elderberry, but let's wrap up the thing on the trust and let's come back more to the elderberry production, because that is just I think that's really vital for one of the things that most people are going to be the most interested in, but how you got there through the trust and the connection between Missouri and North Carolina. Let's wrap that up if that's okay.
Sure. So by living here and having a father who was lived there and a farm there, we worked together. This was something that we did kind of at the end of his life. He recognized that his skills to be able to see all this through on his own were just not quite. He sought out an estate planner. It's a legal opportunity for anybody with an estate to be able to preserve that state in a way that allows that to pass on to your heirs. So there's various different types of trust, and what we chose was known as a Dynasty trust. And so we
repeat, we're getting a little
literally set up figuring that asset, our farm, actually put into trust. So
Rodger,
that's what we did with it. It's actually not that hard. It just
Rodger,
takes an attorney.
Rodger,
Yeah.
time out for just a second. Sorry. You cut out just a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, if you could go back and I think we basically lost the name of the trust, the kind of the trust that you chose, and that.
Oh, okay.
Of that, yeah.
All right, so we'll just do a quick little test. You hearing me okay now?
Yeah, we're hearing you, but just with Wi-Fi, you sometimes there's a cutting in and out. So basically, we just missed the name, the kind of trust that you decided on, and why.
Okay, so we settled on a Dynasty trust. There's several different types of trust: legacy, heritage, Dynasty. We chose Dynasty because the farm had been set up as an LLC. So the farm itself actually exists as a legal business registered through the state of Missouri's Attorney General. So with the Dynasty trust, it allows you to put assets in there such as businesses, investments, land holdings, those type of things, equipment, farm equipment, and those things are actually held in trust. And it's a legal structure. It's actually not very hard to do. It just takes the right type of estate planning legal firm that can set these things up for people. The other reason that we did that is we run into people all the time that talk about land that they don't know what they're going to do with. Well, the trust was set up so that we could actually bring in other people and other land holdings for the trust to manage. The idea being that we're going to do things in a sustainable way and that these things will be around to be available for other farmers and other families. The whole thing is, again, it's about wealth building for the farmers. We have an economy here that has switched drastically from what it used to be. Our gross national product is still being supported in large in part by farms, and it's 1% to 2% of us. And I know in my state here in North Carolina, it's an $83 billion contribution to the state's gross national our state's economy. So it's the single largest contributor to our state's economy. It's bigger than pharma. It's bigger than healthcare. It's huge. I mean, $83 billion.
Right.
And it's being done by less than 2% of our population.
Wow. So who are the major players then?
The major players in our farm economy?
Yeah.
Well, we grow more sweet potatoes, as an example, here than any other state. We have large peanut production, large cotton production, so there's several of the crops that are not quite as known as corn and soybeans that are really big here. We know farmers here in the state that have 7,000 acres planted in sweet potatoes.
Wow.
And they have to be rotated every other year. So they've got to have 14,000 acres that they manage just for sweet production, with every other year half that land going fallow. They can't plant anything in it in the off years. So there's a lot of stuff like that going on in the state. We also have a huge amount of timber in this state. People don't tend to think about timber as an agricultural commodity, but it is.
Sure.
And if you think about all the chipboard that's being made here and the lumber and the furniture that's coming from our agricultural crop of timber, it's rather large.
Yeah.
As a sector of that economy.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So you were basically, while you even began participating in Norm's Farm in Missouri, you were doing so from North Carolina, obviously with commuting. And then you guys set it up in the trust so that it could be run, you could sort of run it mostly remotely. Is that correct?
Well, we can. We've relied on farm managers. We have a farmhouse on the property, and we have a tenant that lives in the farmhouse, and they provide some labor for the farm. I go back there periodically myself. Like I said, we do have some land leased with a farmer who does the soybeans and some of the other organic commodity. Got another neighbor who is a wildlife proponent. Raises things like quail and pheasant and turkeys that we release on the property. We were one of the first release sites when turkey was reintroduced in Missouri. We're part of the Hart Creek Conservation Area that borders our property, so there's about a 3,000 acre conservation area right next to the property. So it's pretty special, pretty unique in its location in the River Hills there.
And what does that mean, turkey release and pheasant release?
Release site.
It was one of the release. One point, Missouri had basically completely eliminated its entire turkey population from 50 of the 52 counties. There were only 2 counties remaining in southern Missouri that had turkey left. And so Boone County decided, along with several other counties, through the efforts of the Conservation Department, to reintroduce turkey to the state.
We're talking
and
wild
so our farm, so our farm was the release site for Boone County when they reintroduced the turkey into Boone County. And now we have turkey that sometimes number in flocks of 75 to 100 that I've actually seen on the farm since reintroduction.
And are those protected, or is that a crop that's basically?
They're protected on private land unless the private landowner allows hunting or he hunts himself. So they have that protection. The conservation area is a conservation area. It's not a state park. And so they do allow hunting, permitted hunting on the conservation area, but one does need to have a hunting license to obey the bag limits and the season. So while there is hunting, there was no hunting on the turkey for almost 30 years.
Wow.
The turkey has now been reintroduced about 44, 45 years old. I was about 12 years old when they released them.
Wow.
So it took about 30 years to build up a population large enough to actually allow limited hunting. You know, and at first when they introduced it, it was a one bird limit, you know, over the 2-week period. Now I don't know what the bag limit is on it, but it's higher than that. At first you could only take the toms, and now they do allow both toms and hens. You know, you got like any bird, the beginning of the season, you know, you can get toms, youngs, females. The last half of the season will be toms only.
Wow. Okay, so let's
Yeah.
To sort of conclude this section of the interview, if you could wrap up, like how does the Missouri farm work and interact with where you are in Pittsboro, North Carolina?
Perfect. That's a great question, Leora. Okay, so I mentioned that the farm is an LLC, so it exists as a business entity. What we did when we created our product business was we registered Norm's Farms as an LLC in the state of North Carolina through our Attorney General. Mm-hmm. We have two separate businesses, the farm being one business, Norm's Farms being another business. Are you still getting that?
Yes.
Yeah, I just got a little notice that my internet connection was spotty. So just checking to make sure you can still hear me. So we have two separate businesses. They're supporting businesses. Mm-hmm. So as an example, on Norm's Farms, our website, we sell cuttings. All the cuttings that we sell come from our farm. So Norm's Farms literally
come from the farm.
Yes.
In Missouri. Okay.
Yeah, so Norm's Farms, our North Carolina-based business, literally purchases those cuttings from the farm in which that we manage and we sell and we ship. So same thing with the berries. When Norm's Farms needs to buy berries, that business literally purchases from the other businesses.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sure.
So
yeah.
Norm's Farms is in Pittsboro. So the farm in Missouri, what is that called? Is that also Norm's Farms?
Oh, that is now named the Lendhardt Family Farm Trust.
Okay. Lendhardt Family Farm Trust. Okay. So
right.
that helps that. So you guys purchase the cuttings, and then what do you do with the cuttings?
The cuttings are available for purchase on our website, and that's in small quantities for backyard gardeners, do-it-yourselfers. There are price breaks on 100 lots for people who are a little more serious, but then the big price break drops by $1 per cutting on 1,000 lots. And the 1,000 lots are intended for those commercial growers, people who want to put out an orchard of, say, anywhere from a half an acre on up. It takes about 1,000 cuttings to plant a half an acre, and that's with a spacing of rows being 12 feet apart, with the cutting spaced approximately 20 to 24 inches within the row.
Okay, so this is a great place to pause and to pick up in a minute with part 2. But I mean, it sounds like just an amazing legacy that your father left and that you're carrying on along with your wife and daughter, Erin, I believe.
Right.
Yeah. So, and you're all three working in the business, in the family business. So that's wonderful. That's what we do. Love to hear that. Love to feature people doing that. So in the next interview, I'm really excited to get into more on the nitty gritty of growing an elderberry as a business.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll see you there, part 2 in a minute.
All right.